this video I'm going to show you how to make a midsummer fairy crown like the one I'm wearing here. And if we turn to our wheel of the year, you can see we are halfway around the year now. We're just approaching midsummer, and traditionally fairy crowns would have been made to celebrate this magical time of year. So what you're going to need in order to make your crown are some very simple things that you might find in your garden, or if you're out in the countryside along an old lane, or even in some farm hedges, that sort of thing. So the first thing you're going to need is a very bendy long twig. Now I'm using birch. It's got to be nice and bendy like this because that was going to form the circular base. You could also use willow, or you could use hazel. And then if you look here, I've gone out and picked one leaf or branch from all the different native trees. Now these all happen to be in my garden, and I've collected about 8 here, and we'll go through those in detail in the later on in the video. And the other thing you'll need are some very fine little withy sticks like this, or tiny thin sticks, where we're going to make the flowers, and then different coloured tissue paper. And you're going to need yellow circles like that, and white with a smaller yellow circle, and then red and black circles, and pink and white ones, and blue ones, and then some sort of maroony ones if you can get them, and some sort of mauvey pink circles too. And these we're going to use to make the wildflowers. And the only bit of equipment you're really going to need is some sellotape and a pair of secateurs or some scissors. So if you want to go out and start collecting all those materials, and then if you want to pause the video and then come back when you've got them all, and I'll show you how to make a midsummer fairy crown. Hello, so I hope you've had a nice time going out and collecting all your native tree leaves. So as I said, I'm going to start with birch. And the first thing you want to do with your bendy one is you want to basically make a big circle out like that, and then very gently start folding in one end like that, and then you want to really do this whilst looking in the mirror at the same time, because you want to try and fit it to your head. That needs to come in a bit more. And then you just wind in. I see I've got all these lovely birch leaves already, so I'm just going to wind those all in. And then I'm going to wind this bit in. Now, birch is a beautiful native tree. It's a very lovely tree to plant in your garden if you have room. We've got a couple here, and they're always full of birds. And the birch is a tree, it symbolises new beginnings. It's often the first tree to colonise bare land, and so its kind of folklore is about going on adventures. So I'm going to start with this new beginning, new crown, new adventure. So I'm just going to try that on. Yeah, that's okay. It's good to have it just a bit too big, because by the time you've wrapped in all the leaves, it gets smaller and smaller. So the next really good shrub to weave in is this lovely ivy. You're probably very familiar with it. Grows over often church walls and big old stone walls. Fantastic again to grow in your garden, because it flowers in September, October, which is quite unusual, which means it feeds all those insects that haven't got anything else to feed from. And then those flowers turn to berries over winter, which are very high in protein and feed lots of birds. So very important. Also, lots of birds, like little wrens, like to make nests in ivy covered walls. So it's a very important plant to grow in your garden. And its symbol, its folklore, is for eternity, which is a word basically meaning forever. So That's a nice, lovely, beautiful native plant that we have here in this country. So now you want to look at your crown and find a gap, like here, I can see, and then you just start, you tuck in the end, and then you start the same process again of winding it all the way round. You know, wind in all that lovely ivy, and just tuck the ends in. So as you can see, your crown is beginning to fill up a bit. Now, what have we got next? Ah, yes. Now, this is lovely crabapple leaves, and crabapples, of course, are eaten by lots of very grateful birds in the winter, and you can also make a really good, delicious crabapple jelly from it. But also, very importantly, it has beautiful pinky white blossoms in sort of early May, which are often absolutely covered in bumblebees and other insects. So it's a particularly, again, lovely tree, small tree that can be grown in your garden. And the folklore for apple has always been a symbol of kind of love and abundance. And it used to be said that actually giving an apple to a friend of yours was a sign of friendship. So yes, lots of love and abundance. We could always do with lots of that. Now this one's quite woody, so you might want to just find somewhere where you can tuck it in a bit. It's not going to bend too much, but that's okay. You just pull it through a bit and then try and secure. That's right, so it stands up a little bit more, gives the crown a bit of height, and then you just tuck the end in like that. So we've now got some adventures, some eternity, and some love and abundance woven into our crown. Now this is the most beautiful tree. We're filming this at the end of May, and it's been quite a hot, dry May this year, so this tree has just finished its blossom, and you might have seen it if you have been out in a car driving along the hedgerows, covered in the most amazing white blossom, just solid, like fingers of white blossom. It's our beautiful hawthorn tree, commonly used as hedging, because it does have thorns on it to stop the animals getting out the fields. Obviously try and choose a bit that hasn't got thorns on it. This bit is hasn't got any at all. It's a new shoot. A very, very beautiful tree, also called the May tree. And its folklore is all about happiness in your heart. And actually, again, that comes from its medicinal properties. It is said to, the berries especially, to actually regulate your heartbeat. So it gives you a happy heart. But my most favourite bit of folklore, of course, is this is the tree of the Fairy Queen. It says that she loves to live in the hawthorn trees. An absolutely splendid one for your garden again. It's covered in those beautiful blossoms, all full of bees. And then, of course, those blossoms turn to the red berries in autumn and feed the birds. So it's double value. Very beautiful, possibly my favourite tree. So again, you want to have a think about maybe on a bit at the front there to show. So you pull it through and then again weave the ends in until you find a little gap and pop it in there. And every now and again just sort of try it on, see how it's looking. Well, that's not so bad. Okie doke. What have we got next? Oh yes, Hazel. Now, although I only picked this an hour or so ago, it's already beginning to go a bit floppy. It doesn't hold so well, but Hazel, easily identifiable by these sort of big plate-like leaves, and also if you touch it, it's all furry, very soft. So a way to remember how to identify it is like hairy hazel, because it's got these very soft hairs all over it. And of course, hazel trees produce hazelnuts. Are very much loved by many of us, but also by beautiful little creatures like dormice who are particularly fond of hazelnuts. So again, a very good tree to grow in your garden. It grows quite small, you can always cut it back and it just reshoots, keeps going. And used, because of its bendiness, used a lot in basketry and weaving. And its folklore is it's a tree of wisdom. And that's maybe due to the fact that the actual hazelnuts are very high in protein, which is really good for your brain. So there you go, a bit of wisdom now woven into your crown. And then here, this lovely tree is a willow. Now this particular type is called a goat willow or a sallow, again our native variety of willow. There are a few other varieties of native willow like the white willow and the crack willow. The weeping willow that lots of people often have in their garden isn't actually from this country, it's actually originally from China and isn't native. But the willow supports loads of species being a native tree. It's often covered in caterpillars nibbling away at it, and obviously feeding the caterpillars feed the birds, and if the caterpillars are allowed to grow they obviously become either butterflies or moths. So a very good native tree. And willows always need to grow in near watery places, not necessarily in water but certainly damp places, and their folklore is they're a tree of healing, and again possibly due to the fact that the willow bark was an old original source of aspirin, which is a painkiller. So lovely, beautiful, like tree, the willow tree. So you want to weave some of that in. And it was also particularly like this goat willow has those lovely silver furry catkins in about, well, sort of any time sort of late February, early March time, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And they, if they're left to grow, they kind of turn gold as the sort of anthers grow out through the catkins. So they go from silver to gold. And in the old days, this was particularly a sign of real magic because it was a sign of alchemy, anything that turned to gold. So much favoured by wizards, the willow tree. And here, now this is a beautiful, lovely, delicate tree. It's called a rowan or a mountain ash, and as you'll see, if you know ash trees, it has a very similar leaf apart from they're all slightly serrated. And here's the flower that's just gone over now. It would have been a big white sort of plate-like blossom, and this will turn into orange berries any time from August to September. So again, like the hawthorn and the apple, really good value because it has the lovely blossoms that feed the insects and then the berries that feed the birds. And rowan, or mountain ash as it's known, is particularly steeped in folklore. Lots of folklore about it being a symbol of protection, especially to travellers. And people often carry either some leaves or sticks of rowan with them for safety on their journeys. So very lovely little tree. And I think, oh, running out of room here, I'm just going to pop it on the side here because it's got nice bushy. I'm going to tuck that in. Right, so a bit of protection now. So we've got all these different trees now in our crown, and last but not least, of course, possibly our most famous native tree, and this is our oak tree. And oaks have got so much magic and folklore associated with them. Most notably, obviously, wizards would have worshipped in groves of oaks, the old druids. It's meant to be the doorway to Fairyland, the tree of the fairy king, of course. And for nature, it obviously has the flowers in the early part of the year, which dormice, again, love to run along the branches and nibble. And these flowers can turn to acorns, obviously, later on in the autumn and fall, and they would have fed, you know, numerous pigs and squirrels and birds like jays. So fantastic value. It's also said, because it is in leaf probably longer than any other tree, native tree, that it shelters possibly 300 to 400 different species, basically more than any other native tree in this country. So a fantastically important tree. Not necessarily one you can grow in your garden unless you've got a very big garden, but definitely one always to revere and protect. So, and oak, its folklore is basically a sign of strength. So now, if we add that into this, so we've got here, we've got willow for healing, we've got apple for love and abundance, and hawthorn for a happy heart, hazel for wisdom, rowan for protection on a journey, ivy for eternity, keeps everything going, birch that started it off on our new adventures. So now we're going to make all this magic in this crown extra strong by adding a bit of oak. There you go. So now I'm going to try this on. Okay, great. So there you go. So far this is the first part of making the Midsummer Fairy Crown with all these native leaves. So this part of the video is going to end, and then we're going to do part 2 where I'm going to talk about all the wildflowers. Hello and welcome back. So now we're going to talk about the wildflowers that we're going to put into this Midsummer Fairy Crown. And obviously, traditionally, people would have gone out and picked the wildflowers in the hedgerows and in the meadows that were in season at that time. But this actually still happened even when I was a child. But from about the 80s onwards, it's basically been illegal to pick wildflowers unless you have the permission of the landowner or you grow them yourself. And also there just really aren't enough out there, sadly, to actually go picking them all anyway. So in our workshops we don't use real wildflowers, we make tissue paper copies out of them, which I'm going to show you how to do in a minute. And the reason we're using wildflowers, if you want to make a proper fairy crown, you have to use wildflowers, because obviously fairies like wildflowers. Please don't go and buy flowers from the supermarkets like roses and what have you, because often they are grown in another country, they're imported into this country, they're frequently covered in all sorts of pesticides and sometimes systemic pesticides, which means that any bees or other insects that might land on them would actually be poisoned by them. So they're particularly unpleasant. We like to, so please don't use real sort of garden flowers that you might buy in the supermarket. So the first native wildflower I'm going to talk to you about is this lovely Buttercup. I'm sure you're familiar with seeing them often growing out in the sunny meadows. Then it's a beautiful upward pointing bowl-shaped flower, and its other name is Fairy Basins, because as you can see it's like a bowl, and in the morning you'll often find some dew that's condensed into the flower, and it makes it look like it's a little basin full of water. So people used to think that the fairies would wash their faces in the buttercups, hence their name Fairy Basins. I'll put that down there, and we're going to get a couple of bits of yellow circular tissue paper like this, and then a tiny wee stick, very thin stick. Very simply you just pierce a hole in the middle of those two circles like that, pinch it up. This might be easier to show you if I kind of do it upside down, and then get the tiniest bit of sellotape, literally less is more, or you can, if you've got clear drying glue, just dip that stick into glue, but it gets a bit messy. I find it slightly easier to do with sellotape, as long as you only use a tiny amount. Twizzle it round, make sure it's okay, and then kind of pinch it back into that bowl shape. There you go. So that's a good representation of a buttercup. I'm going to pop that there for now. Next up, a fantastically popular and very, very beautiful wildflower. Very, very easy to grow in your garden, these. The beautiful poppy, of course. Fantastic deep red colour and these lovely black centre. Very dramatic flower. Now being a cornflower annual, it means that it pops up every year as long as you keep turning the earth over. So you can plant these from seed, they'll pop up this summer, and then they'll set seed, turn the earth over as if you were ploughing a field, and they'll come back again next year. And they have some folklore. They're often called thunder cups because it's said they were meant to protect the crops from thunder. So beautiful poppy. So we're going to make those out of 2 red circles like this, and the smaller black circle in the middle like that. Hold them together. Again, take your little stick, pierce it in the middle, pull it down about a couple of centimetres, then again, same as before, pinch that really tight, tiny bit of sellotape, and then there, look, pretty good representation of a poppy. So, what's the next one? Oh yes, a beautiful fairy flower. Now these like to grow at this time of year. They are in flower at the moment. Quite unusual because they grow in the sort of woodland, semi-shade, often where paths are cut through woodland and the sun strikes through. You'll see these fantastic tall foxgloves. They can grow up to, well, 6 feet tall, and it's said the taller they grow, the happier the fairies will be. Lots and lots of folklore about foxgloves. Most common one is that they think obviously that the fairies sleep in these beautiful bells, and if you can see they've got a kind of white inside with little spots on, and that's meant to be a mark where the fairy footprints are. So again, a lovely beautiful flower. If you're lucky enough to be able to grow in the shady parts, semi-shady parts of your garden, then please do, because the bees absolutely love it. So as it's a bell shape, it's a slightly different way of making this flower, in that, so I'm going to take a white and a pink bit, so the white's sort of that lining, and then you basically scrunch it up like that to make it a bell, give it a quick twist, and then take a tiny bit of sellotape, stick it onto that twist at the top, and then you just wrap it round like that. So you see it's different because obviously it's a downward pointing bell, and that will remind you all about foxgloves. What's this one? This is a beautiful tiny little flower actually. Again, loves open, dry, sunny sites, and very easy to grow in your garden. It's the origin, of course, of pansies, of which you might see in many garden centres, but this is the proper original of wildflower from which pansies are derived, and it's called Love in Idleness, or Heartsease Pansies, its other name, Love in Idleness. Now, for those of you who might know your Shakespeare, you might remember that in Midsummer Night's Dream, it's Oberon, who's the king of the fairies. He has a potion that he puts in his wife Titania, who's the queen of the fairies, in her eyes, so that when she wakes up she will fall in love with the first person that she sees. So that is where this potion comes from, Love in Idleness. And it's a lovely tricolor wildflower, which means it's got 3 colours. It's got big maroon petals, slightly out of shot here, but they are up here, and then these purpley ones and this lovely yellow centre. Quite a complicated flower. I'm not going to suggest we try and make it exactly like that, but if you have some maroon tissue, you need one of those, you need a sort of pinkly purple colour, and then you also want a little yellow one. So again, 1, 2, 3, like that. It's an upward pointing flower, like the buttercup and the poppy. So again, you just scrunch it up and then take your tape, and same as before. So that's a proper midsummer flower, that one is. So is this beauty, absolutely possibly the garden's real favourite. This is the very beautiful cornflower, just the most incredible blue, and they have a sort of purpley pink middle, and just all these amazing sort of trumpet. If you look at them closely, they really are quite fantastic, and often completely covered in bees. So if there's only one wildflower you ever get to grow in your garden, then I do suggest it's a beautiful cornflower. Really good for insects, just the most beautiful colour. Again, like the poppy, it's a cornfield annual, so it will set its seed, and it'll flower this year if you sow it this year, but then you have to dig the ground up again, just as if you were ploughing a cornfield. So yes, absolutely fantastic wildflower. So I'm going to take a couple of blue circles, and this time you just want to cut quite, with a pair of scissors, it's quite fun to cut some jaggedy points all the way around. It don't have to be very neat. It's just to give that idea of that jagged edge. So I'm just going to just keep going like that, and then go round, cut a few more. And then you basically, you don't want them to be matching, you want them to be sort of slightly overlapping in the wrong place like that. And again, obviously an upward pointing flower. There, you see, looks a bit like a cornflower with all its lovely raggedy petals. And as before, so actually you probably can't see these now, I'll just move them here so you can see them. Now getting a lovely collection. And last but by no means least is this. One name for it is the Oxeye Daisy, but its more magical name is the Solstice Daisy. And the other name for Midsummer nights is the solstice, the summer solstice. And so this is obviously a very relevant wildflower to put in your crown. It's said, and it's called the Solstice Daisy because when you get that beautiful light, that sort of dusky, gloaming light, the Solstice Daisies sort of glow in that beautiful twilight. So lovely, magical wildflower too. So it has the bright yellow centre. So I'm going to use a couple of white petals, and I'm going to just cut like that, not like the triangles with the, but literally lots of long petals all the way round to represent those long daisy petals. Yellow centre. It's not quite strong enough. Just chop that off, and there. So, looking a bit like a daisy. So all these wildflowers you can grow really easily in your garden, and if you do, of course you can always use one or two real wildflowers for your midsummer crown, but of course you must remember to leave some of those wildflowers for our beautiful bees and butterflies and other insects, and of course some for the fairies as well. So, having got all your wildflowers, I find this slightly easier if you do this whilst looking in the mirror. So I'm going to do this, I basically just poke them in where you want. You do that with all your flowers, and if you come back in a minute, I'll show you how I've arranged all of mine, and that will be the end. So, as you can see, I've spent some time putting the wildflowers, the replica wildflowers, in the front here of my crown. And I think, yeah, it's about finished. So, I'm going to be wearing mine on Midsummer Night's Eve. I'm going to have a twilight picnic in my garden and maybe drink some elderflower champagne and celebrate all that is magical and natural in this world. So I hope you will join me and do the same. Thank you.